Welcome to Alpha Kappa Psi's webinar titled Get Back Your Time, Time Management for the Busy Professional. This webinar is part of the Professional Development Series. My name is Mackenzie Lauka, and I serve AK Psi as the Associate Director of Education. I'll be your webcast producer. Before we dive into the content, I would like to review the web-based features available to you. This webinar will be advanced remotely, but at the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application widgets you can use throughout the program. I encourage you to utilize the widgets to download additional resources, connect with other attendees during the presentation, and share highlights via social media. A copy of the slide deck and other additional materials are available in the resource list widget that looks like a green folder. The group chat is available for you to interact with other attendees and the presenter during the presentation. When posting, it will share your first name and last initial. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers most common technical issues. Additionally, each of the windows on your screen are also able to be resized, moved, and adjusted to fit your individual learning need. At the end of the program, I'll explain how you can ask a question to our presenter. If you have a question throughout the program, however, you can launch the Q&A widget to submit your question. Your questions will be asked at the end of the program in the order they are received. Be sure to also check out our social media content. Portions of today's program will be tweeted using the hashtag AKSciChat. You can follow along using the Twitter widget in the menu dock at the bottom of the screen, as well as post highlights to your own Twitter feed using the hashtag. You may also find some valuable resources on the AKSci blog, Facebook page, Instagram feed, LinkedIn page, Twitter feed, and our YouTube channel, each of which are available from the aksci.org homepage. Are you too busy for the things you want to do? Do you see others doing more than you and wonder how they do it? Time management is the key to staying on track, organizing yourself, and getting things done. We will cover what popular methods say we should do to get our time back. Then we will go through these and figure out what works for you. As we have learned, one size does not fit all, and you need to find your own time management system. In addition to covering these topics, we'll leave time for your questions and comments. For the presentation, we have one presenter. At this time, I'd like to introduce Tom Henriksen. Tom Henriksen is a speaker, career, and leadership coach who leads others to turn their dreams into accomplishments. Throughout Tom's career, he has learned firsthand how hard it can be to develop leaders and great teams in any organization. As a result of his experience, he has been a corporate and organizational leader for many years and understands the struggles leaders encounter. At this point, I'll hand it off to Tom.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I appreciate it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about time management and really kind of how we do things as individuals and try to manage our time and how important that is. First, I'd like to start off and tell you a little bit about me and a story that kind of really helped me realize how important time management is and having everything together. A few years ago, as I was just getting out of college, I was working in a sales job, and I had all my notes in a planner. And I went back after work one day. It was a snowy day. I live here in Iowa, and we were getting some snow, and I accidentally put my planner on top of my car, and I had a white car, and it was full of snow, and I drove off and then got home and realized I had lost my planner. I went back and tried to find it and looked for about 20 minutes for my planner around my office and could not find it. And I had everything, and this was back in the time, as I tell you, when I was right out of school, was in the mid-90s. So I didn't have the, cell phones that we have today where everything was there. But it was one of those times where I realized how important it was to have everything together, but two, to have it in a couple spots, not just one. I had all my notes and meeting notes for a couple sales calls that I was going to go on the next day, and I really had a tough time for about a week and a half of getting everything together and replanning my day. So as you think about that, and we think about time management today, I have a couple questions here I want you to think about, and just take a minute and write to yourself and think about how you really kind of plan out your week. Because I'm guessing if you're like me, you probably did this probably last night or maybe this morning, first thing, Monday morning, trying to plan out your week. So first thing, I want you to think about, where do you look when you want to plan your daily agenda? Do you have it all on your smartphone? I know some people, even today, I know some people that still don't have a lot of things. They have things on paper. I have a good friend who's is in sales, and he actually has his stuff still in a binder. So but think about where you look to plan your daily agenda. Now, the next question I want you to think about is, do you have short and long-term goals? I'm guessing a lot of you do. And when you look at your agenda or your week, you're planning your week, do you have action items for those long and short-term goals? Can you see progress every week? So think about that as you look at your daily agenda or your weekly agenda. And then also, this is the last thing, and we're going to get to this, especially in this first book we're going to talk about here in a second here, but think about what filters do you have to check if something fits your agenda. Because I think it's important to think about how, sometimes, for instance, you might have somebody talk to you and want you to do something. You need to have a way to filter some of the things that come into you. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. I found that out myself many a times where I've had somebody ask me to do something, and then as I start to work on it, I realize this doesn't fit my goals. It doesn't fit on my agenda, and it's not really helping me. So I think that's an important aspect that we need to think about. So first off, as you can see here on the screen, we're going to talk a little bit about a book by Stephen Covey. This book was written way back in 1994, so a long time ago. But in this book, and we're going to walk through a couple of books today, and what he really talks about, he has some good concepts here, but Covey describes some important things about setting our priorities and how important that is for our personal improvement and really for our life as we try to plan out what we want to do and if there's something maybe we want to improve on. So in this book, though, he talks a little bit about the primary three generations of time management. So as you guys think about, I know I've kind of gone through all three of these, and we'll go to more here in a minute, but really the basic time management piece for a lot of us is really just a simple task list, okay? You put down, kind of like you're going to the grocery store. You think, okay, I need some milk, I need some bread, I need some butter, and you put that together, and you put together a task list. That's helpful, but it doesn't capture, like a time component of when they need to be done. So the next one that he talks about is the personal organizers. So a lot of us had used these back, as I mentioned before, like in my earlier story. Back in the mid-90s, a lot of people used the planners. So, for instance, Franklin planners were out. Covey had some as well. But people would use these and really plan their life. But as I mentioned, if you had everything in there and you lose that, you kind of had a problem where trying to get back to that. So, but that's one of the big steps. And then the third part, or third generation of time management really was the values clarification. So we want to understand what are our personal values and how does that align with what we are trying to do and what we are trying to accomplish. Because really when you think about, efficiency, and in Covey's work, he really talks about this, about comparing the difference between efficiency and setting priorities, is he has this idea of the clock, when we want to measure time, but to the compass. Because we have to have a compass and determine the direction of our life. Because it's not as important as how fast we get things done, but we want to know where we're going. So for instance, if we're in Los Angeles and we want to get to New York and we find ourselves on the way to San Francisco, we know we're going the wrong way. We need to have that map or that compass first and understand what's our non-negotiables. And really that's kind of how we need to think about our life. So the next thing, though, I want to talk about, and you guys, hopefully some of you guys pulled this down off the resources. I know I was talking with Mackenzie before. It's on the resources tab there, but we have a worksheet as well, so you can see it, and it's also on the screen here. But the Covey Quadrants that he talks about really is important to think about our time, and as you can see on the screen there, through the lens of these quadrants. So you can see in the upper left, we have the important and urgent. So this is the firefighting that, a lot of us have done. I know, for instance, you might have a crisis at your work or a pressing problem at home. You might have something that has a lot of deadlines and you're trying to meet those. And really what Covey talks about a lot is how, sometimes we have to spend time there, but if we find that we're spending the majority of our time in this quadrant 1, that we're really sacrificing some of the important things that we need to think about. So as you see and you look to the right here into quadrant 2, where things are important but not urgent. So these are going to be things kind of like really what we're doing today. Where you guys have taken some time to call into this webinar and kind of learn some new topics about time management. And maybe some of these things you've already heard of, but it's good to review, but it's good to take time to really invest in yourself. So we need to think about things like, and talking here in this kind of quality time really are things that can help in prevention in getting things into that quadrant 1. So this is like your capability improvement, or maybe you're building relationships with people, and then recognizing new opportunities and planning things, and then of course recreation. So for instance, maybe this weekend you guys got to do some fun things, some exciting things, maybe something just relaxing, taking it easy. So those are important things that we have to be able to do to have a good balance in our life. And then Covey also talks about in the quadrant 3 are, some of these things that are not important but urgent. So they might be a distraction to us. So for instance, maybe somebody interrupts you at work or on the way to work, or maybe you get a call from somebody. So for instance, maybe if you get a call from a telemarketer or something, it's not important to you, but obviously that phone call is urgent, so you'd have to click off that. But then too, some of the meetings you might be invited to might be urgent, but not important. And you have to think about these things as we look at the different things we have in our life. And then, of course, quadrant 4 is some things that we can really waste time on, maybe some busy work that we have at work, or maybe some time watching, TV or some shows that maybe aren't the best for us to watch, or, just some activities we might enjoy. But Covey talks about how we need to have a good balance in our life, but we need to try to recognize where you're at. So for instance, I know I primarily work in the technology arena now, along with coaching, but I've worked at some companies where really, and I'm sure maybe some of you have this at where you work too, where you spend a lot of your time in quadrant 1, where there's a lot of firefighting. And depending on your personality, some people thrive in that. And that's one of the things we'll talk a little bit about here too, as you think about your time management, you want to think about your personality profile, but some of us enjoy that firefighting. We thrive on that, but other people get drained. And I know for myself, I remember working at this company for a while, and I would get physically drained. I would come home at the end of the day, and it was hard on me. So you got to think about that as you look at your time and what you're investing in. So it's important to think about those time management principles and really think about how important it is to prioritize, because that is an important thing. If we're prioritizing the things in our life, as you look at your week, maybe it's your week or your month, you want to make sure you have time to do those quadrant 2 things where you're investing in yourself. Maybe it's reading a book. Maybe some of you guys are taking classes. Maybe you're going back to school. You want to take time for those things, or maybe some training at work. So you have to prioritize those things, because what can happen is those quadrant 1 activities can fill up your whole week if you let it. And really, the great story that Covey tells about, and I've heard other people share the same story, is really the power of prioritizing. You picture yourself a pitcher of water, okay? So if we take that pitcher of water, or a pitcher, and we fill it up with water, that takes up all the space in that pitcher. And that could be really similar to what, if we let it, we could fill it up with things like quadrant 1 activities. But if we really want to get our important things in, if we plan and we prioritize, before we put that water in, we want to take And Covey tells a story about taking big rocks in. We first put the big rocks in, and then he asks people if that pitcher is full, and some people would say yes, but then he takes and he dumps a little gravel in there, and he asks them again, is it full? And of course now they're starting to see it's not, and they say no, and he pours sand in, and then he pours water. So the whole analogy of our lives are like this pitcher. You know, if we just put water in or let other people put water in, they fill our time up with maybe some things like quadrant 1 or quadrant 3 activities that are just distractions even. But we need to think about how we need to plan our life and plan our week with those big rocks, those priorities that we have. So for instance, maybe you guys have a big goal. You want to think about putting that time in for some of those important things that you have at work, and then maybe you can do some of those other activities when you get time. Another important thing that is we look at time management is to think about our roles in our lives. So for instance, if you have roles at work, you have roles at home, and you want to think about maybe roles and some of the groups you're involved in. Maybe you're involved in certain groups like this, or maybe you're involved in maybe a chamber or something in your local community. You want to think about your roles and think about what your responsibilities are as you plan out your week, and understand those roles and be putting investment in each one of those roles. So you're investing time in each one of those. And then another thing that is really important as we think about within our roles in our lives is how do we respond to surprises? You know, sometimes if you have something come up in your life, if maybe there's an illness in your family or something comes up, you have to be able to really think about how that's going to affect your life and really understand that maybe, for instance, you had your week all planned out, and then on the Wednesday of the week when you were going to have something big at work, something comes up. Maybe your family member calls and you have to go see somebody in the hospital. Sometimes you have to be able to understand and respond to those and realize that that's okay and that's part of life, and understanding that. So, but Covey shares 3 questions, or a couple questions here, just to kind of think about when we put things together. If something like a surprise comes up, we first want to ask ourselves, 2 questions. What is important here? Think about what is the important part here, and is this in line with your goals? So of course, if you have goals about being, you want to be successful at work, but you also want to be a successful, supportive member of your family, you want to think about those roles. But then he also wants us to take time to listen and understand the problem or the surprise that's come up. So we need to understand what is happening and really how it's effect on us, but not rush, but take time and to listen to the people and understand. And then, of course, we need to decide. So we need to be brave and be honest about what our opinion is, and then go forward with that, not to try to second-guess ourselves too much, because that's an important thing as we go along in our lives, is not to second-guess, but to go forward. So really, for Covey, the main goal as you look at your life and with the quadrants is to kind of understand that we need to have a holistic balance in our life. And as you look at your life and you spend time with, having time with friends and family, but also to having, time with your work, and really, as he calls it, and this is especially in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but to time to sharpen the saw. So this is a thing like today, you're learning some things in this webinar, maybe you're reading some books or involved in some other activities. So those are things that you can really, think about how you need to spend time in each one of those quadrants. So that's an important part to think about as you plan out your week. All right. Next up, we want to talk about in this book called Getting Things Done. I'm sure maybe some of you guys have heard of this book. I know it's still a popular book. It's from David Allen, and it was written back in 2001. And he really has a really good system. Now, this book, I want to I know, for an instance, this book is really popular with people who, for instance, like a lot of technology people really like this. I know this is really big with people who are of the personality type you would think analytical. So maybe if you're an accountant or in finance, or you're really a detailed person in getting things done, David Allen really walks you through a whole process about how to set up your life and get things moving through his system. So this book, like I mentioned before, that personality, as we think about our personality profiles and what we're like. I know I worked a lot with the DISC profile and with people as I coach them, and you want to make sure your time management system fits with you. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here as we wrap up. But this one here is very detail oriented. So he has real step through process you can kind of walk through. He actually has a process where you can go and really get your life organized in his GTD is what a lot of people will call this if you go online, the Getting Things Done system. So the main part about his system, though, is that he has a kind of a step through 5 stages of mastering your workflow. So he talks a lot about, having a workflow and kind of making sure we have our information together, because his whole idea is really to touch something once. He doesn't want you to work on something multiple times, but you want to have a flow, and you see in his system, and we'll really talk a lot about these different stages, but how we want to get something in the system and then work it through. So his first stage for mastering workflow is really that collection process. We each need to have a collection process. So he wants us to collect some information. So for instance, if we have, say you're coming home from work today, you go through your mail. One of the things he does is, I'm sure a lot of you still get a little junk mail, but just to file that right away, throw it in the recycle bin or the trash or whatever right away. So he talks about this collection process that we need to have in our lives. So as we think about things, same thing with email. He actually talks a lot about doing this with our email as well, but kind of being able to go through and see what we need and what we need to get rid of. And then, of course, processing it. So we collect it, then we go through the processing of the information, and then we kind of have a quick decision. So and as you can see on the slide there, one of his things is you do the small tasks. You do the small tasks right away. So he says if it's under like a minute task or a 2-minute task, you will take that and you will do it right away. So he wants you to, as you get something, and basically just get it done and then get it off your list. And then, of course, organizing. We have our things organized in a fashion where we can see them and see them quickly. And he has a lot of different steps, as we'll see here, to kind of keep your life organized. And then you want to be able to review your information in life. So he has a weekly review built into his system. I know I've used that. That's kind of part of my hodgepodge that we'll talk a little bit about maybe later of how I do my organization. But we need to have a process of reviewing to make sure really, as you think about maybe your goals in life and where you're at, that we're keeping on track. And then, of course, the last stage to the mastering of the workflow is the actual doing the work. So we need to, of course, do the work and think about our work and kind of get things done, really. So as you can see, he really says it's important to take those small things and need to be done right away. So we need to figure out those things and get them completed. And then as we look at something, if something is not a small task, he has another flow of where we need to think about, can we defer this? Because maybe it's something, for instance, we're in April now, maybe it's something that doesn't need to be done till May or June. Maybe it's something for the summer. So we need to defer it, but we need to have a system to put it in. Maybe it's on your calendar or maybe you're using, like Google Calendar or something where you have it and put it there. And then, of course, we need to see, can we delegate it? Is this something we need to do? Or is there perhaps somebody else that can help you with this? Maybe it's something at work. You can have someone help you that's maybe, more has a better training on this, is more their specialty. Maybe it's a little outside of your specialty and you can have somebody at work help you. Or maybe it's something at home. Maybe you have, if you're like me, you have a kid. I have a 12-year-old son that he helped me stain the deck this weekend so I can kind of delegate things to him and get some assistance. So you need to think about, as we look through our lives, kind of as you can see there on point 2, we need to subdivide those large tasks into those different tasks that we can do. And then we need to capture that. And then, like as you mentioned too, he has this idea of the horizon of focus, okay? So really in that, it's kind of thinking about as we think about what we're doing and we have our current actions, but then as we look at our horizon of focus, we're going to break things down, and it's important to think about. So he has this kind of an analogy of feet. So as you think about, as you're an airplane and you're going up and you can see, and you see this a lot, I'm sure at work, somebody will say, well, just give me the 50,000 feet view, so the big picture. I don't want to see it all, but and David Allen has broken it down, and where he says, like, for instance, so we have our current actions, but then our current projects of what we're working on. So you're at work and you think about your current projects. That's kind of the 10,000 feet view, of our life or our projects, excuse me. So, and then as you think about going up another level, he talks about our areas of responsibility. So this might be the 20,000 feet view. So you think about maybe the roles you play at work and those different areas of responsibility that you have to do, and each of the tasks that are involved in that. And then as you go up to our 30,000 feet view, we have our 1 to 2 year goals. So for instance, you might have some goals. Maybe you want to run a marathon, or maybe you have some goals at work that you want to increase sales, or you want to complete a certain project on time. So you have those 1 to 2 year goals. And then as you get up further into our 3 to 5 year vision, he has a 3 to 5 year vision that we walk through. And really that's our 40,000 feet view. And we want to think about where we're at that 40,000 feet. Because really, as you go up the levels, you understand that it's harder to get that level of detail, so it's not as fine-tuned, and that's okay. And then, of course, he has our lifetime goals at 50,000 feet. So maybe there's some lifetime goals that you want to raise a family or save a certain amount of money, or you want to write a book or do something like that. We have these lifetime ambitions that we're trying to do. So we think about that as we look at our time and really focus in on each of those slices. And then, as I mentioned too, it's important to think about the review. So he has a weekly review just to kind of check base. I know that's important, I think, for everybody to have at least, a time frame where you're checking back to make sure, you have goals. How are we progressing on those goals? And then two, at some point, I know this has happened to me, I've pursued a goal for a while, and then I realized, that goal no longer fits me. So I think it's important that we have that in our review, that we're checking and making sure, are these still goals that we want to do? And then, of course, we think about how important our habits are, and he wants us to think about how we can build up habits, because I know, and there's a lot of work, a lot of books and things on habits and how important they are in our lives, but if we build this system and use our time management system, that we can build up those positive habits and really help us understand our next actions and be able to achieve the outcomes that we want. So it's important to take those and really be able to understand what our next actions are. So as you can see, the level of detail, it's kind of interesting as you guys were going through this. Think about how Covey kind of he's really big on, your values and your priorities. As I mentioned, the talk about, he has that idea of the compass and the clock. So, and then as you go into David Allen's getting things done, you can see he has kind of a process, and as you can see, it's kind of like a set system, but you see those different things. Now, it's important to think about that as you look through these and understand. So next up, we want to look at a book, and now this, of course, is a little more recent. This is a book by a gentleman by the name of Rory Vaden. You might have heard him. He's a pretty famous speaker out on the circuit and does a good job. He's written a couple of books, and this is his second book, but it's called Procrastinate on Purpose. So one of the big things that, and Rory is really big about, being responsible and thinking about what we need to do, but some of the important things that really this jumped out at me as he has what's called this focus funnel. And as I mentioned early on, we had some questions, but I think it's important to, think about this aspect as you look at all the systems to think about how we filter what we want to do, what we want to accomplish in our lives. And using Rory Vaden's focus funnel, I think really helps us think about things. So you can see here on the screen, we got a picture of somebody with their feet up, and it's really kind of thinking about, we can procrastinate because he has this really good funnel to take us through and kind of step through some of these things. So as you can see, the first one is eliminate. What are, if we have something, a task, it's really easy. You think about some of the things we have a task. Can we eliminate this? Because is this task something I need to do, or is it something I can't live without? I know, like I mentioned before, sometimes somebody might tell you to do something, but then you realize you don't need to do it, or you shouldn't do it, or maybe it doesn't fit your goals. So it's important as we look in that first step to really see if this is something we need to do, can we eliminate it? The next step, and this is something that I've tried to do with various, technologies and things as we do things in our lives, is to think about, can we automate this? Or can we create a system for something? I know, for instance, a lot of people have a process. Maybe at work, you might have a process in how, if you're in accounting, you have a process in how you record things. And it's important to, automate that and set that up so, you can do it, but two, maybe there's somebody else that can help you with it or you can work with. And that kind of leads really to the next step in the focus funnel that Rory has for us is, can I delegate this? Can this task be performed by somebody else? Maybe it's somebody else at work. Maybe it's somebody else at home. Maybe you have somebody that can help you with it or can do it for you. And then you can delegate it and know that you don't have to take your time, because that's an important thing. And Rory talks a little bit about this, how we need to understand, what are the things we do well and where we can really produce value, and where other people, we can rely on others to delegate and do things for us. Because that's something too, really, when you think about your time management, is to think about, what do you do well? What value do you bring? And that's important as you're kind of scheduling out your week to know where you can be the most value to your company, or maybe it's to your family, or what things you can do to bring the most value, and then delegate the things that really don't fit your sweet spot. And then the fourth step is procrastinate. So do we really need to do this now? So as I mentioned early on, we need to have a system for if there's something we want to do, but we don't need to do it today. So for instance, it's a little ways away from the holidays. So if you wanted to buy something for a friend or family, or if you want to plan a 4th of July party, that's still quite a ways off. We've got some time. You might not need to do that right away. So you can delegate that and put that later down on the list, procrastinate it. So think about if you need to do something right now. And then the last part about Rory's focus funnel is to concentrate on. So if it's something you need to do and it's the most significant thing for you to do right now, is it the most significant use of your time too? You need to think about that, because we can only focus on so many things, and it's important to, if you have to, if it goes all the way through, as you think about this funnel, you've eliminated things, you've automated some things, you've delegated things to other people, and then you procrastinated on a few things that you don't have to put on, don't have to do today, but you find yourself concentrating on those, 2 or 3 or 4 main activities that you're doing at work, so you can be the most productive and get the most done. So as you think about putting together your time management, you can use this focus funnel, and I think this has been helpful for me. Now, as I mentioned, the different systems here, you look at Covey is talking about your priorities and values, and then that's kind of how he filters things. As we look back on David Allen, he is also, he has a system set that how we can use the system to make sure things fit for us. But then too, as you think about this slide here and talking about what Rory has for us, really that focus funnel could be really helpful in our lives if we have to look at certain things and make kind of weigh if that's something we should be doing or perhaps there's somebody else. So really, as we want to think about this, we want to think about what works for us. So as I mentioned, you want to think about your personality profile and what things really, are you a detail person? If you're not a detail person, I think from my experience, I know I've had this for myself, is you're going to struggle with something like the getting things done system. I've tried that a couple times, and it can be a pretty onerous thing to work on. It's a lot to it. So as you think about your personality and your life and what works best for you, you want to think about the system that will work best for you. So another thing that's important is to think about, are you a person that likes simple processes? Or are you somebody that really can handle the complexity of some of these systems? You want to think about that and think about the pieces and parts, because I think as you look back on what we've covered here, there's a lot of pieces that you can use and can mix and match, because that's kind of what I've done to really think about how I want to have my system, to have it simple enough that I can use it and have it, work for me. Another thing is to think about how a thing you can do is called like a bookend your day. So for instance, there's a couple books out I know and a couple people that teach this, but you can use this as a process to think about, okay, when I get up, I might do, so maybe there's a couple things where you're checking things and making sure you're on track, but then too, at the end of the day, you review that and make sure you have things ready. So for one thing, I know you think about those habits that you have. Maybe you get up in the morning, maybe you check your phone. One of the things I know people will, a lot of times productivity people will emphasize for us is to be careful about looking at something like our phone or looking at email too quickly, because what can happen there is you think back to Covey's system and those quadrants. A lot of times if we look at our phone a lot or we look at our text messages or our email, you're going to end up in the quadrant one, where you're going to be firefighting. Somebody might tell you something that you think is really important, but when you think about it, if you plan out your day or do something important right away, you're going to do that. So for instance, if you need to, a friend of mine was telling me how he wrote a book, is he actually got up at 5 o'clock every day and he wrote for 1 hour every day. And he did that for a while and was able to crank out a really good book and to get it done before he did anything else. And he would actually shut off his internet access, and he did it on his PC so he couldn't see, the news or the email or the alerts on his computer. So as you think about those habits, you need to really think about how you can focus on something. Maybe it's a goal or a task. And then one other thing I think it's important is to think about, how do you work with, is it technology? Are you really good with technology? Because then your system can be based on that. Or is there some other things you want to include? This is something I've learned. Have worked a lot with companies on something called agile software development. And I know what people do is a lot of times we'll get the technology in front of the system. But the problem is you might buy a system and want to use it a certain way that the technology works, but that might not be the best way for you. So for instance, you might want to take a piece of paper and just write out your system and your plans and make sure that your method works with the technology. Don't get that technology in front and let that make the decision. And then, of course, another thing to do is to experiment. And this is something I've done a lot. I will take, and as you can see, read these different books and try different things out and see what works for me. Now, as you can, we're going to have QA here in a few seconds here, or a few minutes, but you can ask me questions, but you have to understand what works for me might not necessarily work for you. But it's always something we need to experiment and try things out and see what works for us, and realize that, you might do something for a week or 6 months and realize that it doesn't work for you, and then change or use bits and pieces of it. That's one of the things that I've experimented with all of these systems we've talked about, and a few others. and it's been helpful for me. So one of the other things that I recently went through a training program with a guy by the name of Kent Julian, and he talked about what's called periodization. So he read the book, and this is a book called The 12-Week Year, and he talks about how you can plan out these 12-week segments of your year and get all this accomplished, and basically you focus in on something. So he tells the story about when he was in 7th grade, he wasn't a very good basketball player, but his coach gave him some drills, and he started to learn and work through those drills over the summer from his 7th grade year to his 8th grade year. And he got really good and went from being a bench warmer his 7th grade year in basketball to his 8th grade year being the best basketball player on his team. So he said, he learned a lot about this whole idea of periodization. So this whole 12 weeks he spent basically his whole summer playing basketball, focusing in on that. And as we think about that in our lives, maybe there's something you want to focus in on, a special project at work that you can spend a lot of time on, and really take that and focus in on it and become really good at it. So if we have that time, we can focus in on that. So the last thing I want to point out to you is really to think about something I've heard from a number of different people, but it's the acronym of WIN, or what's important now. As you think about, maybe you have something at work or something explodes at home, you need to think about what's important now. And, as we think about, kind of along those lines of our different roles and responsibilities, but we think about what is important for us, and really, maybe you need to take a deep breath and think about, where you should be. Kind of going back to what Covey talks about and thinking about our roles and our responsibilities and where we should be at. So that's one of the things as you see, as we talk about this, we have a lot we've covered here. I think it'll be good to do some Q&A. Hopefully you guys have taken a chance to look at that resources tab and downloaded that sheet. I actually have another sheet, a questionnaire that I've built up too. If you guys would be interested in that, you can just email me, but there's a lot of good resources here. I look forward to working through some questions with you and just kind of understanding what things you guys are struggling with time management, because I think we've covered a lot of material here, but I'd be interested to see what you guys have for questions.
All right, thanks, Tom. So that was a lot of really good information. As he said, is going to wrap up the content portion. So now we do want to hear from all of you guys listening in with your questions. As stated earlier, you can launch the Q&A widget from the menu dock to submit your questions. This feature will remain open even in on-demand viewing, and if we do not get to your question, we will respond via email. So we're going to get started with the first question we have here, and that's, so what's the best thing to do when you find yourself off track?
I think the best thing to do when you find yourself off track, and this is kind of like I mentioned before, I think the first thing you want to do is really take a deep breath and think about, why are you off track? What got you here? And make sure you understand, you have your system, your calendar, or whatever you're using, your system that you put together, and think about kind of revisiting that and see where are you now? Why are you there? And then two, what's the best method of getting back on track? So just to tell you a little story about myself, recently, I guess it's been a while now, about 6 months or so ago, I was involved in something that I realized was taking up a lot more time than I could handle, and I had to step back. So I had to kind of unwind some things. So I had to do a little analysis of why I was there, and really this is something I think a lot of people run into. Sometimes you want to just say, you just want to say yes. If somebody asks you to do something, you feel, honored that somebody would ask you, and you just want to say, oh, yes, I'd be glad to help you. Now, that's something you can say yes, but you have to think about it in context of, your system and your commitment too. For instance, if you have with family or with work, you want to make sure you honor those. And that's one of the things I kind of had to unwind some things where I had to say no, and then I had to tell some people, that I can't commit to this, or I can no longer do this. So, but yeah, I think it's important to really, as you find yourself off track, to take kind of a deep breath, understand why you're there, and then assess what you need to do to get back on track. Because it can be at certain times, it can be difficult to get back on track.
All right, so next question we have kind of goes off of that a little bit. So they said, one of the biggest challenges I face with time management is not getting distracted while I'm working on something. So what advice do you have for just specifically staying focused?
One of the things I think for staying focused that's important is really, as you think about your goals and what you want to accomplish, and as we talked a little bit about, each of these systems has kind of a review process in it, but then too the filter. So you want to be able to review your activities. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly, but you want to be able to review what you're doing and make sure it's helping you, keeping forward, or if you need to make changes. But then too, like I mentioned, that filter is important as well. You need to have a filter on what you do, because if you just start saying yes to everybody, your schedule will soon fill up and you won't get the things accomplished that you want to. So if you have those, it's kind of like, as Covey talks about, those quadrant 2 activities. You have to have those things, those big rocks, you have to have those on your schedule, so then you can say no to something, but remember there's a bigger yes somewhere else.
All right, next question we have is, what keeps you motivated?
What keeps me motivated really is, as I think about, as I mentioned, the goals that I have, but then too those responsibilities and roles that I play. So for instance, the things I have to do, the things that I get to do really with my work and with my family, and making sure, I'm on track. One of the things I think that keeps me motivated too is to have people that hold me accountable in my life. So I'm sure as you guys think about, your family, your friends, and the people you hang out with, you want to make sure you have people that help hold you accountable, so they keep you motivated, doing the right things, and that you're moving forward towards your goals, because they want to celebrate with you. You want to make sure you have the people around you that are building you up. But two, also, you want to make sure people that are helping you be accountable in that too will tell you when maybe you're off track, or if you're doing something that might be perhaps it's something destructive, or something that is really good for you, or good for your maybe it's something at work that's not good for your company. So it's good to have people around you that hold you accountable and will keep you motivated and moving forward and kind of pushing you along.
Great. So the next question we have is, how do I hold myself accountable for getting off of my plans?
So how do you, one of the big things of holding yourself accountable is to, keep track of where you're at and see. One of the things that somebody told me about, I think is kind of important, is to think about the concept of having some grace for yourself. So think about, you might have some goals and you want to be disciplined about it, but you have to understand, you might have some missteps, and don't beat yourself up too much. A lot of times people will try to hold themselves accountable, but be too harsh on themselves, and they can get frustrated really quickly. So make sure, you want to hold yourself accountable, but then too, have some grace, but also too, when you do accomplish something. So for instance, maybe you had a goal at work and you accomplished it. Make sure you're celebrating that, and that taking time to realize all of the work you've done and where you're at, because that's one of the things I think a lot of us don't do. We get really hung up on goals, and we don't think about, really looking back and saying, wow, I have done a lot, because, and understand where maybe you've made some mistakes and you learn from those, but then too, celebrate those victories that you have. So it's good to kind of look at that and understand that part.
Right, so you mentioned a few kind of throughout the program, but are there any systems besides the getting things done that you recommend people look into?
I think really, and this is one of the things that, as I mentioned, I think it's really an experiment that you have to look at some of these things and see if, for instance, like with GTD, that's a system that if you're a really disciplined person, that might work for you. Where Covey's, I think, is good about getting kind of people kind of to think about our system and really, our priorities in life and what our values are, and making sure you're moving in that direction. I think with GTD, his is really scripted out. So that's one of the things I think, if you're not a person, like a real detailed person, I would try something different. So for instance, one of the things that I've gone through is, as I mentioned, I've kind of have a hodgepodge of things where I do some of these systems that I've used, but I make sure to have, for instance, like a review, and then to have goals that you set. So you have yearly goals, and then, like I mentioned, this 12-week year, I'm experimenting with that now to try to see if I can, focus on certain things and get things accomplished, or if it's too much. So, it's one of those things where we're all kind of a work in progress, and we got to understand that, something like GTD might work for some people, but it might not for others. So I think it's good to consider some of the ideas there, but then look at, there's so many books on productivity. We're obviously just scratching the surface, but to think about, what works for you. And then really a good thing too is talk to people that you see that are successful and understand what they're doing. What system do they have? I know I've done that personally. I try to do, interview successful people and talk to them and understand, what things are they doing? How are they scheduling their day, their week? Like I mentioned, I know some successful people that still use a day planner and are still in paper, and that's okay. It's just whatever works for them. But, it's good to consider different sources like the GTD system, like Covey's, or some of the other ones that, like with Rory Vaden's system that he has. I think it's good to think about, what is the filter for your system, and how do you keep those, some of those things that you don't need to do off your task list. So yeah, I think it's important just to experiment and see what works for you.
All right, so what is your own personal time management process that you found does work for you?
Well, like I mentioned, the one thing I think is important is to have a review process. I do a weekly review, so I do that every Sunday night. I go through and make sure, see where I'm at on my goals, see if there's anything that needs to change. But then I think it's also good to check in with people that, your family, your friends, and make sure you're not overcommitting on something, or making sure, you have those right people around you to support you. I think that's, as you do your time management, you want to make sure you're not off track. So for instance, I mentioned I had kind of a thing where I'd gotten off track a while back. I had some people kind of telling me, hey, Tom, you need to back off on that. And really it had to, kind of decommit, if you will, from some of the things that I had said yes to. And I think that's part of the thing, as you, have those people that hold you accountable, have that weekly review. And then two, just, feel free to tinker with, different things, because I think as you try to experiment and see what works for you, and you're going to find too, I think, especially as your life changes, you go through stages in your life. You're in college, and then you go start working, and then maybe you start a family or something like that. There's different stages in your life. And I think one, if you have a system that works for you, say it worked for you in college, that might not work for you now if you're in a working world, and, you might have some different things. So you might, but I think it's, just keep experimenting and to find something that works the best for you.
All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions. So if you have any questions, be sure to get those in. Otherwise, this will be our last question for the night. That is, with time management, how do you kind of balance the work-life balance struggle that so many people seem to have?
I think one of the things with work-life balance is to think about, what are your non-negotiables? Where are your bright lines that you're going to draw? So for instance, maybe, you might have, if you have, say, for instance, young kids, and they're going to go to bed at, say they go to bed at 8 o'clock. You might have, say, I want to be home at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, but I'm going to spend 2 hours with my kids, and then maybe you jump back online if you need to, if you depending on your career and your job. But you need to define those bright lines. I think it's important to really determine that balance and understand that, have people know that. Because I think part of the thing is, as you think about your work life, it will expand as much as you let it. So for instance, I found this myself, so I have to, stop looking at email at a certain point in time, or you might have to, say and it's kind of training the people you work with, but then also training yourself to make that habit to say, okay, I'm not going to look, maybe you're not going to look at any email after 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or whatever. And then two, maybe on your weekends, you need to have some balance there too with, if you have, maybe, for instance, you might have some weekends that you have to work, if I know, for instance, I have friends that are in accountants that are doing taxes now, and they have their busy season, but they have clearly defined that okay, after tax season I get this time off. I'm going to spend time with my family and do these things. So it's important to think about what those bright lines are and define it, and because you have amount of control whether you think you do or not. But if you let your work balance or your work life expand, then it can grow as big as you let it, I guess. So it's important to understand your bright lines.
We did get a few more questions in, so we're going to go ahead and answer those. Next one we have is, how can we maximize productivity and prioritize tasks that need to be done, such as homework and studying, with the things that we want to be done, such as going to the gym?
Yep. So that you touch upon a big word there. It's prioritizing. You need to be able to prioritize what's important for you, but then to have the discipline to stick to that. So, for instance, I know this will go back to when I was in college, quite a few years ago, but I learned pretty quickly that I couldn't let, for instance, I was living in the dorms at the time, and I couldn't let there's a couple guys next door that they always wanted to watch a movie about 8 o'clock or 8:30, and I'd be trying to study, and I had to really prioritize what was best for me, because after going through some classes, and I remember I had a couple tests that I didn't study enough for, and I ended up learning how important it was to prioritize that study time, or maybe it's for you, it might be work time, depending on where you're at in life, but you have to prioritize those important things and then fit in, time. You can have time on maybe some weekends or maybe certain nights of the week. Maybe you don't have a test tomorrow, so you can, maybe do some fun things, but make sure you prioritize your week as you plan out your week with, as you're looking, if you're in school, maybe you understand when those tests are or quizzes, or maybe you have a paper due, and putting that time in and blocking that out. So that's your priority study time, but then and have some fun time too, in there, that you have some slack that you can enjoy some fun things.
All right, so this one will be the last question of the night. That's, with my personality, I tend to resist too much structure or control. As such, I kind of struggle with time management. So what recommendations do you have for this type of personality?
Okay, so if you tend to resist structure, and I think I've met some people like this, but one of the things, as I mentioned, is you have to be, flexible enough to think about what things can help you get things done. You don't have to have a specific structure or plan to your week, but maybe you have some loosely defined goals for the week. So maybe you want to get certain things done and then be able to reward yourself with, for instance, like we're talking about, maybe you want to go see a movie, or you have some tests this week. You want to think about, okay, loosely planning out when you can get some certain things done, but then too realizing that you need to build some flexibility into it. So as I mentioned, I've worked a lot with agile software development, and really the idea with that is to really build in flexibility, because you need to understand, things are going to change, and so if you're somebody that doesn't like structure, you want to just experiment with some loose time frames on our week, and maybe you don't have to structure as specifically, but try out having some priorities on your week, and then being flexible enough as you find time. Maybe you find that you got some free time, you can work on something, and then to make sure you build in some breaks and some fun things too, but be flexible enough. And and I totally understand sometimes people don't like that structure. They feel roped in, and they don't like that. So you have to experiment and build a flexible framework that works for you.
All right, thank you, Tom. So with that, it's going to wrap up the presentation. I would like to thank all of our participants and callers for your great questions and comments. For any follow-up question or conversation, feel free to contact Tom using the information that's provided on the screen. Again, I would like to thank Tom again for his great insight and expertise. Finally, we encourage you to look at the additional resources provided by Alpha Kappa Psi on aksi.org. You can find webinars and other resources related to professional and leadership development. If you're interested in Alpha Kappa Psi specific chapter operational-based resources, you can visit myakpsi.org for webinars, e-learnings, and documents, which can be found under the Road to Brotherhood. If you have any suggestions for future topics, please send them to education@akpsi.org. Again, thank you to our presenter, and thank you for joining us.